Understanding the living being we call a human is one of the most difficult problems in the world. Although psychology attempts to comprehend the human soul, it is impossible to fully grasp such a complex entity. Nevertheless, we continue trying to make certain inferences about people. One of those who strove to understand the human soul was Carl Jung. What makes him so special is not only the ideas he proposed, but also how these ideas were nourished by numerous cultures that preceded him and continue to influence contemporary cultures today. It's highly probable to encounter his ideas in movies, TV series, or games we play. He spent most of his 85-year life working productively, often through tears. Therefore, rather than attempting to explain all his ideas in a single video, I will discuss the concept of the shadow, which particularly interests me and might interest you as well. The first point we should focus on is the concept of the shadow, which forces us to reconsider the notion of evil. Can a person be entirely evil? Sometimes we encounter people about whom we can confidently say, "There's nothing good in this evil person." But does the opposite exist? Can we call someone completely good? According to Jung, every person has a dark side, and he calls this inner darkness the shadow. The shadow is the sum of the 50 faces considered sinful by society. It is the totality of repressed desires and wild impulses. It's impossible for a person to be purely good and know how to escape their shadow. In fact, such escape would worsen the current situation. Jung says the following about this. Unfortunately, there is no doubt that a person is less good than they imagine or wish to be. Every person carries a shadow, and the less this shadow is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the darker and denser it becomes. In fact, Jung states that to be truly good, a person must be aware of their potential for evil. In his words, a tree whose roots do not reach down to hell cannot have its branches rising to heaven. We can find many real-life examples of the shadow concept. When we closely examine the lives of even those we define as the best people, we see their cruel sides. But the most interesting example I can give is the incident described in Christopher Browning's book, Ordinary Men. This book discusses the infamous Battalion 101 that participated in the Nazis' massacre of Jews. This unit is special because it consisted of people with completely different backgrounds compared to other units. Composed of middle-aged men deemed unfit for military service who showed no particular affinity for Nazi ideology, this unit had neither been on the front lines like others nor participated in such massacres before. Yet even these ordinary, seemingly harmless men didn't hesitate to shoot Jews when the necessary conditions were met. In fact, after a while, their commander told them they could go home if they wished, but the unit rejected this offer and continued their actions. This book demonstrates that, just as Jung claimed everyone has a shadow within them, even the most ordinary and harmless-looking individuals could display catastrophic evil during the Jewish massacre. This book is evidence that what we call the shadow can be found in all kinds of people. Another interesting aspect of Jung's work is how stories have been exploring this concept for years. Movies, TV series, games, all kinds of narratives we consume actually explain this concept very well. For example, in Fight Club, we can consider Tyler, the protagonist's alter ego, as his shadow. Similarly, Walter White's Heisenberg persona in Breaking Bad or Kratos' rage outbursts in the God of War universe serve as examples. What makes these stories special is that instead of presenting a simple battle between good and evil, they portray a person's struggle with the evil within their own heart. In these stories, the hero and the villain can be the same person. Rather than declaring one side good and the other bad, and depicting a struggle between black and white characters, the person becomes aware of the evil within themselves and battles it. This narrative structure perfectly aligns with Jung's thinking style because, according to him, enlightenment comes not by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. But what if we never make the shadow conscious? What happens if we constantly wear a mask, assuming a role that isn't truly ours? This brings us to the next concept we must examine, the persona. Jung's concept of persona refers to the mask a person wears or the role they assume when with others. This is something every person has. When we enter a social environment, we adopt a different role than who we fundamentally are. There's a difference between who we are at school or work and who we are when we return home. Although the persona may seem artificial and insincere, wearing a mask suitable for the environment is necessary to be accepted in social circles rather than showing our true inner self or shadow. The problematic aspect of the persona concept is wearing this mask for too long. To understand this, let's examine the relationship between the shadow and persona. We can consider the shadow and persona as two opposing concepts. While the shadow is the deeply hidden aspect of a person, the persona is what they bring to the surface and show to their environment. However, these seemingly opposite concepts share a common point. When taken to extremes, both can take over the person. The problematic aspect of the shadow is being deprived of it for too long and eventually becoming the shadow itself. For the persona, this manifests as wearing the mask longer than necessary and becoming that mask. Jung says the following about this situation. The danger is that people identify with their persona. The result is a completely impersonal personality that cares too much about what others think, like a professor identified with his textbook. Yes, there are moments when a person can harm themselves, but what's more dangerous is that a person can harm their environment through their persona. Looking at the definition of persona, on one hand, it's designed to make an impression on others. On the other hand, it serves to hide one's true nature. This second function reveals another dangerous aspect of persona. It can be used not only to adapt to social environments, but also to conceal one's true intentions and deceive others. I can give the example of a serial killer who created a persona to manipulate his intended victims. By putting on a charismatic, witty, and educated mask, he manipulated his targets before revealing his true face. But is there a segment where this persona is never seen? Can there be a person who expresses themselves completely authentically without wearing a mask? While it's impossible to go through life without any persona, every person has managed to live without one for a brief period. Childhood. A child has no persona until they grow up. They feel no need to wear a mask in their interactions. Since children's social environment and image perception aren't fully formed, they don't focus much on how their words or actions might hurt others. Looking at this, we can understand why people often long for their childhood. There's a unique pleasure in living without playing a role, but this passion for one's childhood represents a different psychological issue. Jung frequently uses a concept called puer aeternus, meaning eternal youth. In mythology, this name is given to a god who never grows up and remains forever a child. Jung analyzes this concept in people, particularly men, observing that even when physically mature, a person can remain spiritually childlike. Such people fear responsibility, always view life as a game, and when facing difficulties, turn to their parents rather than struggling independently. Jung noticed this pattern occurring so frequently that it became a recognized concept called Peter Pan syndrome. Looking at Peter Pan, he perfectly embodies Jung's puer aeternus concept. He can never grow up, is doomed to remain a child, avoids life's painful aspects, and constantly seeks pleasure. He isn't even connected to the real world, living instead in a fantasy world called Neverland. In fact, such men who fail to reach social maturity and remain childlike also draw attention to the mother figure. We see how mother and son mutually betray each other's lives. A mother's overprotective attitude can prevent her child from maturing. Jung calls such mothers devouring mothers. These mothers emotionally abuse their children, preventing them from becoming independent individuals or leaving home. Even when showing love, it's essentially selfish love aimed at making the child dependent. The child of such a mother will likely develop Peter Pan syndrome. Hafiz Anna from Hababam Sinifa can serve as an example of such a mother. There's even a video focusing on this aspect. Also, students in this class might treat bananas as batteries due to Peter Pan syndrome. So, what is the solution to this entire knot, according to Jung? How can someone living like Pan rid themselves of perpetual childishness? Here, Jung emphasizes the concept of sacrifice. To ascend to the sacred peaks of life by fighting for oneself, one must break away from their mother and the family hearth. The natural course of life requires young people to sacrifice their childhood and similar childish dependencies. From one perspective, the process we call growing up requires spiritual sacrifice. The child must sacrifice their comfort to mature. Examining this comfort in detail, children have no serious responsibilities, spend most of their time playing, and can receive all kinds of support from their families. Comparing children's and adults' lives clearly shows that childhood is both easier and more enjoyable. Seeing these sweet aspects of childhood might make us wonder, if being a child is so wonderful, why call it a sacrifice? Actually, examining Peter Pan syndrome reveals that those affected aren't entirely happy with their situation. Although an inner voice tells them to face the real world and confront difficulties, they pay a heavy price for betraying this voice. Clinical psychologist Jordan Peterson, influenced by Jung, makes an important point here. While those who want to grow up must sacrifice childhood comforts, those who refuse to grow up are actually sacrificing something else, their potential. By choosing to remain children, they sacrifice what they could become. Viewed this way, the price paid for remaining a child is much heavier than that of growing up.